I greatly enjoyed the opportunities the NZBC offered because it was a single channel. To be honest, by today's standards, we were a bit rough and ready. We'd try anything. We were certainly innovative within the confines of available technology. And we pushed boundaries and we'd race out and shoot things. But look, it was slow and in some respects ponderous. I mean, the cameras that we had, the Oricon Pro 600 or Pro 400, gosh, I can't remember the number now, it's so long ago. But it was a lead-lined box, you know, and it took, the cameraman could carry the camera. If you thought about doing a tracking shot, the sound guy had all the sound stuff. The reporter had to carry the batteries and the cables to walk up the street at a protest. I remember there's the APEC protest in Victoria University. Covering those was, the cameraman was drenched in sweat. You take the footage back, you've got to wait for it to be processed. Then editing it was really difficult because the sound was not on the same frame as the vision. So there was always a gap between sound and vision, and editing it produced bizarre effects that people of my vintage would recognise. Things like goldfishing, where you cut an interview together and before the sound could catch up with the vision, this guy would go, and then start speaking. It was like really weird. But look, the essentials of television journalism were there. I think given the constraints that we had, we did remarkably well. And certainly we had to try a lot harder to make things happen because the tools were simply not there. We shot everything twice, in black and white for New Zealand and then in colour for the rest of the world, because really we were the pool team to cover radio and television for the world. And then of course on the day that the bomb went off, which we observed, I was allowed on the bridge. I think there were 3 or 4 of us allowed on the bridge in full anti-flash gear and thick goggles that were designed really to make sure that we weren't damaged, our eyes weren't damaged by the flash, because we really didn't know, you know, what the impact would be. And so the captain stood on this bridge and we were monitoring the French countdown, and he was allowed to peek for the moment of the flash. So the minute he was confident the flash had finished, we were allowed to take off our goggles, and they opened the hatches, and Wayne Williams was the first person up through the hatch to start shooting it as well. Black and white, that's what the image is now, because we were the first priority. And then I took that film back across to the supply a couple of days later, dangling on the jackstay. Wayne and I went back, and then we got picked up by the RNZF Hercules, flown to Whanuapai, into the city, had to go to get it processed. And we were so close to the news, they wanted it on air that night, of course. We had no time to edit it. We just put a Chinagraph mark at the beginning and end of the sequence, laced it up in the telecine chain, and I stood at the weather's desk and gave an ad-lib commentary over it. That's why we did things. Bill Earl, who was department head, offered me the job of producing Fair Go, which I really enjoyed. I got off to a, well, I think one of the things I did as I brought back Brian Edwards, who had produced it, but I thought he was much better at presenting, not to say he wasn't good at producing. And so I persuaded him to come back. And unfortunately, there was a bit of cross wires, and Sharon Crosby, who presented it, had sort of intimated to me that she wasn't that keen on staying presenting it. So I kind of said, oh, well, that's all right, then you're not. But I think she was really hoping to be persuaded by me to anyhow, it was cross wires. You know, they're great people, all of them, and I really enjoyed working with them. It led to a bit of a fuss at the time. But, you know, that was a great show. I'll often tell the story, and Kevin Milne repeats it at my cost, that at the end of the year, I thought the show got a bit tired, and I made this statement to Bill Earl, was that I thought it deserved to be rested. And people on Fair Go continue to remind me, even in the days when I ended up running TV1 and Fair Go was in my stable of programmes and continuing on strongly, how wrong could I be? We were dual presenting, one in Wellington and one in Auckland. We had a sports segment. We came out of Shorten Street. The facilities were not that good. This was before the big move to the television centre. But it was what I thought was quite a powerful mix of not really long form, semi-long form, sort of 10, 15-minute reports would be a maximum duration of a single report. Short form current affairs, daily reactive news current affairs stories, and a news bulletin as well at the top, which was a sort of 7 or 8 minutes. And that, of course, it drew from the early days. The first current affairs show that I worked on, the first nightly current affairs show in New Zealand was Tonight at 9. And that too had a similar model, but it wasn't as long, didn't have the same resources, but the same essence was there. That a place you could go to capture the day's news, because you probably, if you're coming home, you've missed the early evening bulletin, but also see a more sustained coverage and reports, and some long-form interviews as well. Interviews in those days were 7 or 8 minutes long. Today they tend to be shorter than that. We started to prepare. Well, firstly we moved the news forward to 6 o'clock. Then we experimented with the Paul Holmes program over the summer months. I think it's called Midweek with Holmes. We just tried out to see if it was going to work, and then we were confident it would. And Harold Anderson, who was the head of TV1, rang up one day, and I think Paul Norris was over in the UK, and rang up one day and said, I think it was like in February, and said, can you get Holmes on air on the 1st of April? And we said yes, because we were desperate to do it, even though it was a huge stretch at that range. Paul Cutler was sent to Sydney to look at the operations here of nightly current affairs shows, because Holmes drew some of its inspiration from a current affair and programs of that ilk here. And we launched that, and of course that was hugely impactful. The arrival of TV3, they certainly, and not just that year, but forever after really, forced TVNZ to lift the game. I mean, they were constantly champing at our heels, doing things sometimes better than us. They were very agile. They had less resources. In some respects, that was a blessing for them. They made the most of what they had, whereas we had huge expectations. We were an established player, well-resourced. Sometimes that led us to be a little ponderous at times. But, we had to find our way to compete, and we did. Well, I think the thing that my critics would seize on was the fact that I introduced advertising into programs. In the past, the advertising had been between programs, and there was some ambiguity in the act. And I used that and said, well, I'm allowed to put them in programs. I'm only about 5 minutes an hour, so it's very low intrusion. But that and a series of programming decisions allowed me to vastly lift the ratings, take revenue from 30 to about $90 million. I mean, triple the revenue. And unlike TVNZ, SBS doesn't give a dollar back to the government. So every dollar I was able to earn, I was able to invest in programs. And we developed a slate of drama programs. In 1 year, we produced more Australian drama than the ABC. And I'm proud of that. And the team I worked with were motivated and innovative and energized, and fantastic ideas. And the dramas we were doing were about the multicultural experience here, the Indigenous experience here, the sort of dramas that the commercial networks and even the ABC was shy of doing. And I was delighted to be able to do that. In some respects, I felt like I was doing with SBS the sort of stuff that I would have liked to have done with TVNZ. It saddens me that New Zealand hasn't come up with a reasonable balance between public broadcasting and private. And when I say that, I am so cognizant of the challenges in a small market to fund a proper public broadcaster. In many respects, I think the history of New Zealand broadcasting has been blighted by the constant discussion about selling TVNZ and not allowing it to find its place. I think Helen Clark introducing the charter was great. but her failure to then allow TVNZ to be properly equipped and resourced to deliver that charter was an awful failing. Her insistence on dragging out a revenue which forced a high level of commerciality created this sort of organisation that I suspect struggles to know exactly what it stands for. And from what I understand today, it believes that it stands for as a commercial operation and that its level of public obligation is severely reduced. I don't blame management of TVNZ for any of that. These are political decisions made over a series of years that have brought it to this position. And it disappoints me that there is really no true public broadcasting left in New Zealand.